From is getting a fifth season, and that fifth season is the last one. 4 years of clues, 4 years of questions nobody could fully answer, and now the writers actually have to pay all of it off. No more stalling. So here's a question I want you to sit with for a second. Out of every character trapped in this town, who has the least screen time relative to how much the plot actually seems to revolve around him? Not Boyd, not Tabitha, not even Julie, who can literally walk through time. I'm talking about a 9-year-old kid who showed up in episode 1 holding a toy and talking about fairies, and who by the end of season 4 is being visited by his dead father's ghost and sent on a scavenger hunt for a lake that might not even exist. His name is Ethan Matthews. And once you line up everything this show has actually shown us about him, side by side, the theory that he's somehow tangled up with the man in yellow stops sounding like internet nonsense and starts sounding like a plan the writers have had since day one. Quick hello if you're new here. I break down the mysteries of From piece by piece, using only what the show has actually confirmed on screen, not wild guessing for the sake of a thumbnail. Let's build this case properly. Start at the very beginning. The Matthews family is driving to Yellowstone. Jim and Tabitha are already planning a divorce. This trip is supposed to be one last normal weekend before they break the news to the kids. They never make it. The RV goes off the road and the family wakes up in Fromville. Here's the detail almost nobody talks about. Before any of that happens, while they're still just a normal family in a normal RV, Ethan is playing with his sister Julie using a toy named Norman. When Julie kills Norman in their game, Ethan gets upset and says Norman needs to go to the fairies at a place called the Lake of Tears. Write that name down, the Lake of Tears. A place a child invented for a toy story, before the crash, before anyone has seen a single monster, before the town even exists for this family. That exact name comes back later as something real. Something the town itself shows Ethan during his very first seizure, on his very first night in Fromville. Now, compare how everyone else reacts to this place versus how Ethan does. Jim spends half the season refusing to accept where they are. Jade, supposedly one of the sharpest minds in the show, spends days convinced the whole thing is an elaborate prank. Tabitha is barely holding herself together. Ethan calls it a quest. Within a day, he's decided the entire nightmare is basically one of his adventure books come to life, and he's already found and bonded with Victor, the most isolated, most traumatized survivor in the entire town. Someone who's been alone for over 40 years and doesn't trust anyone. That bond happens almost instantly, and it matters because Victor tells Ethan the boy in white first appeared right before two cars arrived on the same day, which is exactly how Ethan's own arrival played out. The boy in white can only be seen by a handful of people in this show: Victor, Sarah, Tabitha, and Ethan from night one. The very first time Ethan sees him, the boy in white makes a shushing gesture, like he's telling this kid to keep a secret. What secret? Nobody has ever explained that. 4 seasons later, we still don't fully know. Here's the piece of evidence that should actually stop you cold, because it isn't a fan reading between the lines. It's something the show puts directly on screen. In season 1, Sarah starts hearing voices that give her information she has no way of knowing, and those voices start directing her to kill people. She kills Toby first. Then the voices give her a new target: Ethan, a child who has been in town for less than 24 hours. She goes after him with a scalpel. He gets away, and in the chaos, she ends up cutting her own brother Nathan's throat instead, a moment that haunts her for the rest of the series. Sit with that for a second. Whatever is running this town looked at every single person trapped inside it and decided the 9-year-old needed to die immediately, before he'd even unpacked. Not Boyd, not Jade, Ethan. This show plans its violence with intention, and the intention here was aimed at a kid who, up to that point, had done nothing but talk about a lake. Now add the smaller stuff on top. Ethan is dressed in yellow constantly through season 1. Yellow shirts, yellow jackets, in a show where color choices are never accidental, and that eventually gives us a villain whose entire identity is built around that exact color. Then in season 3, Julie tells Ethan she's been time traveling, visiting pieces of the town's past. Ethan is the one who names the ability. He calls her a story walker, and he defines it with surprising precision. She can visit chapters of the story that already happened, but she can't change them. Once a story has been told, it stays told. Now go watch Season 4, Episode 1, The Man in Yellow Corners. Julie tells her almost the exact same idea. A story, once told, cannot be rewritten. A 9-year-old and the most dangerous entity in the show are operating off the same rulebook, using the same language, months apart, with zero way either of them could have compared notes. Here's where most videos on this topic stop, because they're working off Season 3 and Episode 1 of Season 4. I'm not stopping there because Season 4 gave us new material, and it makes the whole picture stranger. Early in the season, Jim is killed. Not by a monster in the woods. He's found hanging in the barn, and the town is grieving before anyone's even processed what happened. Wrecked by it, Ethan sneaks out to the family's flipped-over RV in the middle of the night to use the radio. And Jim appears to him. Maybe a ghost, maybe a vision the town itself is generating. The show never fully clarifies which, and honestly, that ambiguity is kind of the point. What Jim's apparition tells Ethan is specific. Find the Lake of Tears. Think about what that means. Ethan didn't invent this location out of nowhere for a toy game and then coincidentally dream about it later. Season 4 confirms it's a real, physical place, and his dead father is now steering him toward it, years after Ethan first spoke that name as a 5-year-old, before this family had ever heard of Fromville. And there's something quietly devastating buried in this, if you think about it for a second. As a toddler, Ethan's entire mythology around this lake was built on bringing a dead toy back to life. Now his actual father is dead, and the same fairy tale location is being pushed on him again, like it might undo that too. That's either a heartbreaking coincidence, or the show telling us this lake, and this kid, have always been connected to the exact same idea, reversing loss. So Ethan spends a chunk of the season on an actual hunt for this place, dragging Victor along, wading through swamp water, testing whether the water can heal an injured bird he found, refusing to quit even when the adults around him treat it like a distraction from the real problems. Along the way, he and Jade physically find a yellow suit abandoned in the forest. When they bring it back, Victor's own mother is revealed to have drawn pictures of a man in a yellow suit decades earlier, long before anyone in the current timeline had ever laid eyes on him. Now here's the detail I think is the single biggest piece of new evidence Season 4 handed us. Later in the season, the man in yellow, disguised as Sophia, lures Tabitha out to the RV, and he speaks to her using Thomas's voice. That confirms something huge. The man in yellow is the same presence that's been talking to the Matthews family since the radio warnings back in Season 1. He isn't a new threat that showed up recently. He's been embedded in this family's story since the pilot, borrowing voices, borrowing people, to reach them. If he's been speaking through people connected to the Matthews family this entire time, then Ethan hearing from his own father's voice on that same radio and getting pointed toward the exact mythology the man in yellow operates by stops looking like two separate storylines. It starts looking like the same handwriting, both of them. If this is the first time you're hearing this laid out, that's genuinely worth a like, because it gets weirder from here. I want to be fair here, because Ethan isn't the only name floating around for who becomes the man in yellow. There's a whole separate theory built around Randall, the character who keeps hearing cicadas that nobody else can hear, and who the show has spared from death in situations that should have killed him more than once. Some fans stretch the same idea to Boyd, pointing at a Season 4 trailer where he briefly appears with noticeably darker eyes, next to marketing language about becoming what you fear. It's a solid theory. Cicadas as a symbol of transformation is real folklore, and Boyd is exactly the kind of worn-down, morally compromised leader a show like this loves to twist into its next villain. But here's where it falls short compared to Ethan's case. Randall and Boyd's connections are symbolic. Bugs, eye color, a line from a trailer. Ethan's connections are structural. He's naming the rules of this universe before anyone teaches them to him. He's being hunted, by name, in Season 1. He's receiving direct contact from what might be the exact entity running the entire town. That's a different category of evidence. Season 4's finale settles something that used to be a genuine open question. For years, people debated whether the boy in white was helping the residents or quietly working alongside the man in yellow. The finale confirms he's on the opposite side. He's actively rooting for the town's prisoners to win, nudging them toward the truth, while the man in yellow tries to keep the whole story running forever. Now put that next to the very first time Ethan meets him. Night 1, in the woods, the boy in white appears and shushes him. If the boy in white is protecting the residents, that gesture wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Keep this quiet or keep this safe. Maybe both. It means both sides of this fight noticed Ethan immediately, before he'd done anything to earn that kind of attention. The kind entity wanted him quiet. The town's dark force wanted him dead. That is not the treatment a background character gets. Put all of it together and you get two realistic ways this plays out. Ending 1. Ethan is the person who finally understands Fromville well enough from the inside to actually break it. He's been fluent in this town's rules since before he could tie his own shoes, and that fluency becomes the reason the cycle ends instead of repeating. Ending 2 is a lot darker. Something happens to Ethan across seasons 4 and 5. Grief, trauma, something that pushes him along the same path the current man in yellow already walked, whoever that person originally was. The story doesn't end. It just restarts with a new author. And that author is a kid who used to talk about fairies and a toy named Norman. Both outcomes fit everything the show has planted so far. And we're actually going to find out which one it is because Season 5 is officially confirmed as the final chapter. MGM Plus began production already. Cameras rolled in Halifax in early July, cast members have been posting from table reads, and the plan is to wrap filming around November before the show moves into post-production. That puts us on track for a 2027 release, which means the countdown to real answers has genuinely started. So, that's the case. A kid who knew the name of a supernatural location before the supernatural was even real for his family. A kid the town's dark forces tried to eliminate on day 1. A kid using the exact same language as the show's central villain to describe how the town's rules work. A kid whose dead father is now guiding him toward the same lake he invented as a toddler. I don't think the show has fully tipped its hand on which ending we're getting, but I think they've been building Ethan's role since the pilot, quietly in the background, while everyone was busy watching Boyd and Tabitha carry the plot. Tell me where you land. Does Ethan break this cycle, or does he become the next chapter of it? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want the full rundown of every unresolved thread heading into the final season, that video is coming soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.